the third chapter on 37, on page 37, on Daf Lamed Zayin 37. So I just want to give you a warning about today's daf. There's a lot of information here in this daf, and we'll do our best to try to keep it simple and concise and clear. Okay. So yesterday we with that said, well, let's start the daf, and I'm just gonna go back. We left off at the end of yesterday's daf, so it's 36b at the end of the page toward where it says where there's two dots, 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara is quoting the Mishnah, that the Mishnah says that you need chazaka in 3 years to get, you need to be there for 3 years to acquire a chazaka. Says the Gemara. It says the Mishnah. I'm just going to say it outside. Rabbi Shmuel says that that's the 3 years is by a field of grain. I'll stay a lavan. A grain field is a white field. Why is a grain field a white field? Because grain, if you ever pass by a wheat field, and you'll see it looks white. That's why it's called a stay a lavan, a white field. Because you need that, because it's a white field, because it's a white field, then you need to have 3 years chazaka. However, when you have an orchard planted with many different varieties, and each tree has a different harvest, a different harvest time, a different harvest season, a different time of the year, you can get a chazaka after 1 year, because once you do 3 harvests and an orchard, a fruit field, you can get 3 harvests in 1 year. So it says Rabbi Shmuel, you can get 3 harvests in 1 year. The 3 years is only when you have something which takes 3 years to harvest down, to get 3 harvests. If you can get your 3 harvests in 1 year, so 1 year is enough. That's Rabbi Shmuel's shita. We don't, the Chacham argue, and they say no. The Chacham say no. It's not. We don't hold. We argue and we say no. Even by an orchard, you need to have a minimum of 3 years. Rather, they say, but you don't need to have the same. You don't need to have the same harvest, the same fruits to harvest the same fruits 3 times. Rather, you can divide it up. Okay, with year 1, I'll harvest the palm trees. Year 2, I harvest the olive trees in this field, and year 3, if you harvest the grapes in this field, that is a chazaka. You don't have to harvest the same fruit 3 years, as long as it's 3. You have 3 harvests in 3 years. Okay, that's the argument. Says the Gemara. Amar Abaye, says Abaye, Midi Rabbi Shmuel nishma l'Rabbanan. From Rabbi Shmuel, who told us you can get 3 different types of if you harvest 3 different types of trees in the same year, that's a chazaka. So the Chacham argue, but they only argue that you need 3 years. However, if you harvest 3 years, you scatter around the harvest throughout the field, then so you didn't harvest your whole you didn't harvest your whole field. You harvested throughout, you scattered out your harvest. This year you harvested 30%. The next year you harvested 30%, a different 30%, and the third year you harvested the final 30%, which only adds up to 90%. So you have to add on more than 30%, 33% to be precise. It's 33%. So if you harvested a third of the first year, another third, the second year, another third, the final third, the third year, that's a good. So you had 30 trees. And each base saw, okay, a base saw is a piece of land the size of a base saw. And the Gemara says somewhere else, in other places, that it's if you when you plant trees in a base saw, which is about 100 feet by 100 feet, you can only plant 10 trees. 10 fruit trees in this base saw, because if you plant more, it's too dense, and the trees they're not going to have proper they're not going to grow properly. If it's too scattered, then it looks too scattered. So 10 trees is the maximum that you can plant in a base saw. Okay, if it's less than we'll see some. It's going to come up later about how much between 3 and 10. More than 10 is too. However, more than 10 is too dense. It's too packed together. So that's why we say 30, because we're talking about you have 3 base saw. So in each base saw you have 10. You have the maximum in each of in your base saw. So if you have 3 base saw, so 30 trees. And you achal asara b'shanazu. If the buyer he ate, it's called the machzik, the one who's trying to acquire ownership. He ate 10 in 1 year, the first year. We're going to see that he ate 10. He harvested 10 trees scattered around, not just these 10 trees which are on the first side of the field the first year. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about he scattered around the harvest throughout the field. So the first year he ate 10 scattered. Asara b'shanazu, asara and another 10 b'shanazu, asara and the final 10 b'shanazu in the third year. Harezu chazaka. That's a chazaka. How do I know? I know from Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel, who teaches us in the Mishnah, you can get a chazaka in 1 year. So we argue on him. We say you need 3 years. However, we only argue on that you need 3 years. However, he told us that you don't need to eat the whole field, to harvest the whole field together at once. As long as you have 3 separate harvests scattered, that's enough. So he holds in 1 year, but we hold 3 years. So that's what we see from him. We're just taking what we're taking a chiddush from him, even though we don't hold like him in something else, but in this we hold like him. Didn't Rabbi Shmuel teach us? We went up to the top of the next page, 37a, today's daf. Didn't Rabbi Shmuel teach us that 1 fruit is a chazaka lekula peri? By harvesting 1 part of the one type of tree, that gives you a chazaka on the whole tree. That's considered you harvested the whole field. Hachanami have a chazaka lahani. Hani have a chazaka lahani. These 10 trees, going back to our case, are a chazaka for these. Vahani and the other trees have a chazaka lahani, are a chazaka for these trees, and therefore you can acquire chazaka with harvesting a third of your trees every year. Okay, Vahani Mili, says the Gemara, on one condition. The Gemara does that a lot. Vahani Mili, hey piku, when the fruits were this law that you can acquire chazaka by eating only a third by harvesting only a third. That's only if the trees didn't produce fruits that year. Okay, so if you had only a third of your trees producing fruits and you harvested them, that's when we said the previous halacha. Avalapiku, however, if they produce fruits v'layachal and he didn't eat them, that's not a chazaka. Why? Because you should have ate them. You should have ate all the fruits. If the trees produce fruits and you didn't eat them, that shows that you're not really acquiring ownership, and therefore it doesn't work. Okay, that's one condition. V'hu, and a second condition in 2 words. The bazi bazuzi. Bazi bazuzi means he scattered. Like we explained this before. That scatter to acquire chazaka on a large field by eating only a third. It has to be that you harvested scattered throughout the field. So and we can look. Okay, fine. You ate somewhere in this field. You harvested. So then that's as if you harvested the whole field. But as long as that's if it's scattered. If you only harvested one side of the field and you can draw a line between where you harvested and the rest of the field, so then that doesn't work because it has to be scattered throughout the field. Okay, before we start the next Gemara, the next Gemara starts Zeh Hechzik. It's 5 lines from the top. Before we start, we gotta say over. We have to speak out some of the information to understand the next page of the Gemara. There's a argument that comes up later in the Mishnah, later in Bava Batra. It comes up in the 4th chapter. We'll get there in about in about a month. It's the machlekes. The argument is between Rabbi Akiva and Chachamim. A person sells his field. A person sells his house. A person sells something. So you can say one or two things. You can say he sold with a generous eye, or he sold with a stingy eye. Okay. For example, if a person has a bar is a well or a dus, a cistern, as a water, and back in the olden days, that was the water supply for people. And so a person sells a bar, he sells a pit, or he sells a cistern, and it happens to be that it's this well is in the middle of his property, and he sold just the well, and the property around it he left for himself. So now the buyer has this well in the middle of the seller's property, and he has no way to get there. So it's nice that he bought a well, but he has no way to get there. It's fenced off, and his friend says, "It's my property. I don't let you go here." So what should he do? So there's an argument. If we say it's okay, fine. So the buyer says, "Give me a pathway. Let me enter your field." The seller says, "No, you have to buy from me. Pay me an extra fee." Yeah, it's an add-on. It's an add-on fee of access, an access fee. So the buyer says, "No, when you sold it to me, that was intended that when you sell it to me, that it's included. It's included in the price." Okay, so the question is, the argument is, do we say that the seller sold the whatever? So over here it's the well. He sold it with a generous eye, and the pathway, the access way is included in the price, and the buyer wins without paying. He can get access without paying any extra. Or do you say no? The seller sells with ayin ra'ah, with a stingy eye. And I'm selling you the well. I'm stingy. I only want to sell you the well. If you want to have access, you have to pay extra. You have to add another fee per year or whatever, or a one-time fee, a one-time expense. And it's too bad. That's one.
Pay extra for the wheels on the car. You guys probably out the wheels.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it has to be something where the argument is something which is essential.
Yeah.
Which is essential is included. Like the well, for example, you would say pay extra for each brick. That's everyone agrees that's included. But we're talking about like extras, like for yeah, maybe like let's think in the car. What would be like an add-on that we pay extra for? The keys are included.
Extra polish on the car. You polish with extra time.
Yeah, maybe like a free oil change or something. Some people do that, but maybe someone like that. Anyways, that's one important halacha to know for this the next to know. Another halacha that's important to know is that when a person sells a field. When a person sells trees. Person sells trees in a field. So he has this field, let's say a base which is 100 by 100 feet, and it's planted with trees, with fruit trees, and the seller sold 2 of his trees. I'm selling you only the trees. You do not. The field is mine. All the ground is mine, except for I'm selling you only the trees. Everything else I'm keeping for myself. So, he didn't actually say that. He just sold him 2. I'm selling you the trees, just the trees. He didn't speak out. He's keeping everything for himself. He said, I'm selling you only 2 trees. And then he kept quiet. Okay, so over here, there's a difference between 2 trees and 3 trees. The difference is, by 2 trees, we say the buyer, when he bought the 2 trees, he only has rights to the trees themselves, as long as they're still producing fruits. As soon as the trees the trees stop producing fruits, they die, then he is finished. He only bought the trees themselves as long as they're producing fruits. Once they stop producing fruits, then he's out. Then the seller, the owner of the field, goes. He tells them, "Have a nice day," and let's go. And that's it. It's over. However, that's only by 2 trees. However, by 3 trees in this Besa, in this 100 by 100, 3 trees. If he bought 3 trees, because he bought 3 trees, also included in that is the ground surrounding the trees. And if the trees stop producing fruits, he has every right to go and cut down to plant new trees in the place of the old trees. That's the difference between 2 and 3. 2 trees are considered random or just a tree. 3 trees is already considered a stay elon. It's considered already now. It's like you have 3 trees. It's a stay. It's an orchard. Once you have 3 trees, it's considered an orchard. Buying an orchard, and then then you have rights. You have every right to not cut out the tree and plant a new tree in this place and forever. Now this because you acquired ownership in part of the field. The question is if the whole field or just surrounding the trees. That will come up later in throughout Bava Batra. So those are 2 important things to know before we start the next Gemara. Is number 1 is we were saying that there's an argument about if a seller sells with a generous eye or stingy eye. We're going to see where it comes up. And that's one halacha. And the second halacha that's important to know is that when a person sells a field, sells 2 trees, then it's just the trees. And 3 trees is he already acquires ownership in part of the field. Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the top. We have a little bit different this case over here. Is that 2 buyers bought a field together. One of them, number 1, bought the trees, and number 2 bought the field, just of the ground, none of the trees. So 2 buyers together bought the field. It's a little bit different because before it was a buyer and a seller. Here it's 2 buyers. Amar Rav Zvid, says Rav Zvid, you know what? Zakana ilanes, the one who bought the trees, he has rights only to the trees. With Zakana karka, and this one has rights to the karka, to the land. Meaning to say, if the trees dry up and they stop producing, so then he's the one who bought the trees is out, and the one who bought the field gets everything. Maskiv la Rav Papa. Rav Papa asks, it's not true. Imkain, I don't hold like you. Imkain, if what you're saying is true, ein la balei lanis bekarka klum. If that's true, what you're saying, the buyer of the trees, he doesn't have any rights to the field. Le malay bal karka labali lanis. Let the buyer of the land tell the buyer of the trees, akari lanachashkov, take your trees and uproot them and go. That means, and Rashbam explains this argument to take your trees. It's only once they stop producing fruits. While they're still producing fruits, he has every right to the trees. But Rav Papa said, I don't understand. When you have 2 buyers and they both bought one of them bought land, and one of them bought and the other one bought trees. He also acquired ownership in part of the land. The one who bought the trees has some ownership in the land as well. And therefore, he said, I don't hold like you. Elam Rav Papa says Rav Papa, Zakana ilanas. The first one has rights to the trees. V'chatzi karka, and half of the land. Half of the land means over here enough land that he can grow. They can plant a new tree when the original tree dries up. Because buying a tree doesn't give you all of a sudden rights to the whole land. It just gives you rights to keep your tree here forever. So it means when your tree dries up, so plant another tree in this specific plot where the tree is. That's what it means, chatzi karka. It doesn't mean exactly half. We don't draw the line halfway. It just means he has according to Rashbam on this, that it means he has rights to in the land to plant a new tree. Vizeh, and the other one, kana chatzi karka, he only has rights to the land itself, of the remaining land. Chatzi karka over here means the remaining land, and so we have an argument over here what to do when two buyers, one of them buys trees, and one of them buys the land. What do? How do you split it up? Reb Svid says you split it up land and trees as long as they're producing fruits. Once they finish, he's out. And Reb Papa says no, you split it up. That one of them has the trees forever, and one of them has the remaining land. Okay. Two dots. The next Gemara. It's based on the previous Gemara. Pshita. Pshita can mean some places as a question, as it usually means a question. But if you have pshita in the beginning of a sentence, it means a statement. It means meaning to say the following statement is simple, and it's leading up to a question. So the following statement is simple, pshita. However, the next case is one question. Pshita. The following case is simple. Machar karka v'shir ilanis lefanav. A person sold the land, and he left and he kept the trees for himself. So it's different than the case the previous case. It's different than the case that I explained before when he sold trees. Here he sold the land. The sale was on the land, and he kept the trees for himself. A little bit different. Yesh like karka. Over here we say he kept the land for himself to be able to keep the trees forever. Okay, so now we're getting on to the argument of if a seller sells with a generous eye or with a stingy eye. Over here we say everybody holds that he sold with a stingy eye. When he sold the trees and he left the land for himself. Over here, I'm sorry, the opposite. He sold the land and he left the trees for himself. So everyone agrees that he's stingy and he wants to keep the trees for himself forever. We're going to explain why in a second. But Rabbi Kiva, even Rabbi Kiva, who's the one that holds the Amar Marche Bar Yava Meicher, that a seller sells with a generous eye, and over here he should say that he sold it with a generous eye, and he should only get the trees, he should only keep the trees for himself as long as they produce fruits. No. Hani mili gabi bar v'dus. That's only by the bar, by the well, the dus and the cistern, where they don't ruin the land. That's when Rabbi Kiva holds that he sells with a generous eye. When he sold the well and he kept the land for himself, then we say he sells with a generous eye, because there's nothing. The well is not doing anything to the land; it's staying where it is. Avalilanes, however, trees, the kamakashi ba'ara, when they ruin the land, because the trees, they get in the way of the rest of the remaining land, because trees produce trees that grow roots, and the roots get in the way of the rest of the field. Then we say, okay, fine. So the trees, they root themselves into part of the land. So when I kept the trees for myself, and I sold you the land, I had in mind to keep the trees for myself, even in part of your land, because even though I'm generous because I'm selling to you and I want you to be happy, that's what Rekiva is understanding. But over here, it's nice. I want you to be happy, but I left the trees for myself, and trees take up space. And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to keep I'm gonna have to keep the trees forever, even though I'm generous. But over here, it's different. The kamakashi ba'ara, we just turned the page on 37b. The kamakashi ba'ara, they ruined the land. Shiyuri Shire, he kept the trees for himself. He kept them for himself forever with part of the land. The Eli Shir, because the seller says, if I give you everything, you're going to tell me one day, Akari lancha vizil, take your trees and go. Once they stop producing fruits, and therefore I don't want that to happen. So therefore, even though my eye is generous, but I don't want it to happen, you're going to send me out and kick me out of the land because my trees stopped producing fruits. So that case was simple.
Okay.
Well, I'm quoting the Gemara.
Yeah.
Shita. Well, yeah. The Gemara, it says the Torah teaches us. The pasuk says that Yirush, to have Yirush Shamayim, fear of heaven, is like what is it worth? So the Gemara asks, what's it worth? The whole world's struggling to have to acquire fear of heaven. Says the Gemara, we're talking about somebody, Moshe Rabbeinu, who already has fear of heaven. Once someone acquires something, then it's the Gemara said, what's it worth? It's if you have something already, it's much easier to it's looked at lightly, as if something you're struggling to get somewhere, then it's much more difficult. For example, you're climbing a mountain, and it's thousands of thousands of feet you're climbing, and each step of the way is difficult. And you're saying, who's able to get there? When am I going to get there? It's very difficult. But once you're there, once you have it, you say, oh, I'm here.
Yeah.
So it's Pshita means it's simple once you get there. It was a little bit difficult. Says the next case. It's 4 lines. It's 2 lines to the second line from the top. Machar ilanes, one who sold trees. V'shir karka lefanav. So now we're saying the flip case. The one who sells trees and he keeps the land for himself. So that case is plucked to Rabbi Kiva v'Rabbanan. That is the classical example. The classical case of the argument between Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim. Rabbi Kiva, the Amar Meicher Brian Yafa Meicher. According to Rabbi Kiva, that one who sells with a generous eye. Islay, he can the buyer who bought the trees. He has rights to the trees, lasting rights forever to the trees, because the seller sold them with a generous eye. I had in mind to sell you the trees forever. It could be not, right? If you hold a stingy eye, the Rabbanan Leslie, the Chacham say no. He sold them with a stingy eye, and he only has rights to the trees as long as they are healthy and producing. Okay, now it gets complicated. Now it's before we had the argument between Reb Zvid and Reb Papa. When you have two buyers, one of them bought the land and one of them bought the trees. So the Gemara wants to fit in Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim. The argument of Rabbi Kiva and the Chachamim, they want to fit it in to the previous machlekes. It gets a little confusing. Rabbi Kiva is Islay. Rabbi Kiva is the one that says he sold generously. He has rights to the trees forever. But Afilu Rab Zvid, the Amar Ein Rab Zvid, who we saw before, says there's no right when by two buyers. He says he doesn't get the trees forever. Hani mili gabish nela kuchas. That's only by two buyers. Because over there it's different. To Amar Lei, he tells them, just like for me, I don't have rights to the trees. When you have two buyers, so you say they both bought part of the field. One of them bought the land, one of them bought the trees. So you bought the buyer of the land tells the buyer of the trees, I bought the land, you bought the trees. Just like I have no rights to the trees, so too you have no right to the land. By two buyers, it's a different case. Over here, the Rabbi Kiva's argument is by a buyer and a seller. By Rabbi Zvid's case, mentioned before, we're talking about two buyers. Two buyers is different than a buyer and a seller. But here, but by a buyer and a seller, he sells him with a generous eye. Okay. The Rabbanon, according to the Chachamim, Leslie, the Chachamim say he sells with a stingy eye. Even Rav Papa, who said before he has rights to the trees. Okay. Hani mili gabish nelakuches. Rav Papa holds by two buyers over there. In a way, it's better than by a buyer and a seller. He has it from a different angle. Rav Papa comes from a different angle. He tells him, just like for you, he sold with a generous eye. So to me, he sold with a generous eye, because the point is, the seller sells with a stingy eye. This is the Chachamim's view. That's only because when he leaves something for himself, he sells a well, he sells a tree in his property, so he still has the property. So he's stingy because it's my property. I don't want you. So then he's a little stingy. But when you have two buyers, the Amar Lake, okay, when you have two buyers, so there's no reason to be stingy. You're back to the fact that he's a person who sells wants his customers to be happy. He wants his customers to come back and to be happy with their purchase. So when you have two buyers, he doesn't have his own self getting in the way, and everyone agrees that he sells with the ayin yafa, with a generous eye. But by the case with the buyer and the seller, when the seller kept some for himself, then we say he sells with a stingy eye. That's the Chachamim's viewpoint, and it can fit in even with Rav Papa by two buyers. Okay. Any questions before we move on? Okay. Maskifla Rav Papa. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Amri Nardai. Amri Nardai is 9 lines from the bottom. Now we're going back to Chazaka. Going back to Chazaka of 3 years. When you eat the fruits for 3 years, you acquire ownership. As long as you say I bought the field and I lost my contract. Achlan Ritzufin. If he ate the 3 years Ritzufin, if it was planted densely, and if the trees or the fruits were planted, the crop were planted too densely, too packed together, Ein like chazaka, he does not acquire chazaka. The point is, I'm going to say the Rashbam, the second opinion, the second explanation. He explains that when a person plants things, there was a custom to plant trees, to plant some types of crops very densely, and initially to see which ones are planted are stronger. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Which ones are going stronger? Those he'll keep. The ones he sees are not doing so well, he's going to uproot them. So you have these small little trees, little thin trees, baby trees. The ones that are doing well, he's going to keep. The ones that are doing poorly, he'll uproot them. That was a custom. So we say Achlan Ritzufin, if he eats the crops, if he harvests when they're packed densely, Ein le chazaka, because originally they were intended to uproot, and therefore it's not proper eating, it's not a proper harvest, and then therefore it's not. Therefore he does not acquire chazaka, because chazaka is based on that you're eating a proper harvest, and this is not a proper harvest. Maskefla Rava asks, if that's true, Hai Mishra de Aspasta, a row of aspasta. Aspasta is camel feed.
Animal feed.
Oh, animal feed. Okay. Animal feed. When you plant crops which are intended for animals, and they were packed very densely. So the person who buys a field of aspasta, of this animal feed, what's going on? Well, how does he acquire chazaka? If you're telling me that if the crop is planted too densly, then there's no chazaka. So how does this person get a chazaka on this aspasta? If And aspasta, you can't tell me that he should plant it more scattered, because the way to plant aspasta is to plant it densely. So how does he acquire chazaka? Ella Amar Rava. No, I argue Machar and Ritzufin ain't like karka. This the halacha of densely was said elsewhere. Was said back to between a buyer and a seller, if he acquires part of the land. Says, and that's where we consider this halacha of densely. If the trees are planted too densely, and the buyer and he sold him the trees in a field which were planted too densely. Over there, we say that he only has the trees, and when the trees they die, then he is lost. He's out. Because over there, the point is that when they're densely packed trees, densely planted trees are intended to uproot. And therefore, don't tell me that I have rights I have lasting rights to the trees, to have trees here, because excuse me, the trees which you bought were intended to uproot. Your whole argument that when I have lasting rights to the tree, to have trees in this field, is only when the trees are supposed to be here. But these trees that you bought are not supposed to be here. They're supposed to be uprooted, and therefore, you don't have, the buyer has no rights to the trees, lasting rights to the trees. As soon as they stop producing, he's out. Amar Reb Seir. Okay, so now it's interesting, because you might say, okay, fine. So there's 15 trees here. There's 5 too many. Okay, fine. So the buyer can say, okay, fine. So 5 too many, but keep me with the 10 trees. Let's ignore these 5 trees and let's look at 10 trees. And if I bought 10 trees, I have lasting rights. So why these 5 extra trees? Why do they get in my way and make me lose out? Okay, these 5 extra trees, maybe you can ignore them. So that says the Gemara, Amar Abzera Ketanai. It's based on argument of Tanaim in Mesechus Kalayim. And so we can ignore something. If trees are packed too densely, can we ignore some of the trees and look at the other trees? Can we overlook them? Karam. Okay, so before we see the actual halacha, I'll just say over some background. Is that when you have a kerem, a vineyard has planted, there's a minimum of 5 trees 5 vines to be considered a vineyard. A single vine is not considered a vineyard. You need to have 5 trees to be considered a kerem vineyard. If they're planted too densely, so then we say one of the trees will be uprooted. So it's considered like we ignore the tree and we say you only have 4 trees or 3 trees if they're planted too densely. It has to be planted on a space of between each vine needs to have a minimum of 4 amas. 4 cubits, which is about 8 feet. You need to have a space between each vine. If they're planted too close together, then it's no good. So Karam Kitan, let's go back. Let's go to the Mishnah. The Gemara brings a Mishnah. Amar Abzer Kitanai. This argument is an argument of Tanaim. Karam Shehu Netua Al Parchas Me'arba Ames. A vineyard. These five vines were planted in a space of less than 4 amas. They're planted too densely. Reb Shimon Aimer Einei Karam. Says Reb Shimon, it's not considered a vineyard. It's packed too densely. One of the vines will be uprooted, and it's considered a single vine, a single vineyard. A single vine. This is a play on words. A single vine. It's a single vine, and it has different halacha, has different laws than a vineyard. And the Chachamim say, Harezu Kerem. It is considered a vineyard. V'rayin, and we view SIMTM as the middle ones which are packed too densely together, ki'ilu ein, and we ignore them and we view them as if they're not here. So this halacha, previous halacha about if you can ignore them, is based on the machlaikas, the argument of Rabbi Shimon and Chachamim by Kalayim. Okay.
grow very well.
So
Some people grow well.
it's a little hard to ignore a tree. The tree's in
Right.
front of you. Yeah. So it means the point is that we know for sure this tree is you're gonna uproot this tree eventually because it's getting in the way. It's taking up too much nutrients. It's getting in the way. It's not supposed to be here. So we can view and say, okay, fine. And when a couple of weeks he's gonna get this tree will be removed. So let's view this situation as if the tree's not here. And that means let's view this tree as if right now it's the future, as if it was uprooted. Okay, this next Gemara. The next Gemara is two more lines. Amri Nardai, two lines from the bottom, says Nardai, Haiman dezaven dikla lechavre. A person who sold a palm tree to his friend, Konile, he acquires ownership mitshipule from the depth at Tehaima until the. I'm sorry, shipule. Oh yeah, shipule means the bottom of the tree until the depth of the ground. From the bottom of the tree is the surface level of the ground. You have the tree above the ground, the surface level, and then you have until the depth of all the way down. So when a person buys a palm tree, he acquires ownership from the surface until the depth of the land, and that's his rights he has rights forever to that place. For example, if the owner wants to dig there, he has to get permission. Even deep down, 30 feet, until the depth of the land of earth, then he has rights to that. And we'll see more about this tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Everyone should have a nice day.